Hello and welcome to episode 2 of Engaging Internal Comms, the show for employee engagers and internal communicators who like to keep up to date with new ideas and innovations in our profession. Hello, I'm Craig Smith from the Big Picture People. We're planning on running the Engaging Internal Comms podcast in seasons, and each season is going to have its own theme. Over this first season of Engaging Internal Comms, we're going to be talking to a wide range of experts and practitioners who are innovating and challenging the received wisdom, but really making a positive impact in the internal communications and employee engagement arena. Our aim is to explore areas that are off the beaten track and that we may not normally associate with internal communications and employee engagement. We're going to be looking at areas like organisational purpose, employee well-being, branding, age diversity, experiential learning, etc. And the people who we're going to be talking to are going to be looking at these areas from non-traditional angles. So if you're looking to broaden your horizons in the world of internal communications and employee engagement and get some new ideas, this is going to be a great show for you to listen to. In this second episode of Engaging Internal Comms, I wanted to look at the area of employee well-being, which is traditionally something that organisations come at from a compliance perspective, i.e. it's something that we need to legally comply with and that we need to make sure that we're ticking all of the boxes. My interviewee today is going to talk to us about how we can make that more of a systemic thing and make it more of a cultural thing rather than, as I say, something that is a compliance-based process. We're going to be looking at how well-being can form part of your strategy within your organization and how using data and research can really allow an informed process with that. We're going to be looking at how a defined return on investment can come from a well-being program and how that can really help us get it up the strategic agenda within the organization. We're going to look again at a recurring theme, I think, in a lot of our episodes is going to be the line manager and the role of the line manager and how they are key in managing an effective well-being program. And in a changing world, how an employee well-being program is something that we should really be looking to give strategic focus to. So I think you'll find this a really interesting interview. So the topic for today's episode is around mental health and well-being. My interviewee is someone I've known for a number of years, and that's Dave Algeo. Dave's LinkedIn profile describes himself as a stress speaker and trainer and a men's burnout coach. David worked for the police force for 22 years and has had his own business that he's successfully run for the last 14 years. It's great to meet you again, Dave. Could you tell me a little bit about what got you into this area of stress and mental health?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. So I've always had a fascination with the brain and psychology and how we behave. But I guess what really brought the stress and well-being and coping into sharp focus was my experiences as a police officer. But then as back in 2006, set up the business, I was wanting to leave the police and move into this training area, which I've always been passionate about, teaching and learning. And really, I jumped ship from the police initially, intending to never go back. But unfortunately, I did because I didn't know what I was doing in my business. So I kind of had a year out where I ran a business. Ran is a very loose term because, to be fair, it probably ran me into the ground. I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know about sales, clients, all that. I had no network and things like that. So it was a very stressful year. And it was in that time that I came to realize that it's not so much about stress. It's about the fact that stress gets in the way. It gets in the way of how I cope, how I feel, how I work towards goals and achieve things. And that's when it really brought me into what brought the field of coping into sharp focus for me. So I went back to policing part-time, then full-time to kind of repair the financial hole that I'd found myself in as a result of that. But I then found I had to practice what I taught as I started to research and read and develop the material and the resources and tools that I teach. And as you know, I use metaphors around the vegetables, the cabbages, the sprouts, and radish and things like that. They're simply metaphors to sort of illustrate some of the key tips, tools, tactics to cope and look after our well-being and develop that personal resilience and team and manager resilience as well, which it kind of all forms a part of that for organizations. Yeah. So I kind of found I was having to do that in the heat of running a business whilst working full-time shifts in a pretty stressful environment, the custody office, where you're dealing with lots of vulnerable people in high demand, high volume, very unpredictable, very risky, and a lot of responsibility on yourself. So I kind of felt that going back, whilst I wouldn't have chose it, it kind of helped me. It was a crucible in which I kind of shaped my own
Yeah.
passion behind it, if that makes sense. The
Yeah.
credibility side, I guess.
Yeah. Okay, no, that's good. And I mean, as I say, I've known you for a long time, and I know it's always been like a real sort of a personal thing rather than oh, I know, I'll do something on stress. It's always been a kind of something that
Yeah.
you've been really passionate about. So, I mean, this show's all about conviction and taking people away, taking organizations away from just box ticking and doing things because they have to. And I was just looking at as part of the research for this interview, I was looking at it's Personnel Today 2017. Employers must get to grips with the mental health in the workplace, with politicians focusing on the issue of recent case law showing that employers are failing to understand their responsibilities. I know one of the things you've been doing for years now is trying to get away from this legal compliance and really getting people, organizations and people really passionate about this, whether they're learning and development people, whether they're HR people. So what are some of the things you've been doing to try and really get this into, out of legislative compliance and get this into something that people are really passionate about doing for the right reasons?
Yeah, that's when you kind of line me up for this interview, I've been thinking about this because I think you're right. There was a lot of years where it probably wasn't really the most vogue thing to be talking about stress and resilience and what have you, and I think that there is for many of us personally, never mind as an organisation or representative of the organisation, there's kind of a resistance to this idea that stress can affect me, and and talking about it and opening up. And that's where I kind of initially started with, well, how can I just get the barriers down of the individuals I'm speaking to? And that's where hopefully the metaphors and the humour started to prove itself, in the sense that it helped get around that resistance. And then as I started to build relationships with some to be fair, some great people who really they get it, in the world of HROD and engagement, as they started to wrestle with things like the results of their staff surveys and the links between staff engagement and well-being, I didn't really find, to be honest, that I had to convince, particularly around the 2017 onwards, that the people in that particular area and those responsibilities didn't particularly need any convincing. What they struggled with, I guess, was how can we convince the decision makers, the purse holders, that this is actually really important. It's not just fluff. It's vital to our day-to-day business, and staff wellbeing engagement is part of that bottom line argument as well. So I found that was good, and it was kind of turning my mind to how can you kind of support them in presenting a case to them, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So I mean that's a really important point. I was going to ask you this, so it's now maybe a good time to ask you. So this whole return on investment, which is this kind of horrible, well, not horrible, but it's this kind of why should we do it?
Yeah.
And I think actually, whilst it sounds very cold, it's not just from a very, what's the bottom line. I think that's part of it, but that actually I think people realize that there's a return on engagement, there's a return on investment in getting people. So what, what is that business case for an organization to get it away from just legal compliance into something that we're doing because there's actually a tangible benefit for the organization doing it right? What's that selling point?
Yeah. Well, as somebody who struggled with that question personally in the business, like how can I show that this is worthwhile return, etc. In the early days, it's been a question I've wrestled with. But in 2017, you kind of mentioned that Personnel Today article, and I think that ties in with, if we can hark back to pre-B word Brexit, 2017, Theresa May stood up and did an announcement where she said she's going to commission a research report into mental health and workplace mental health. And that report, she announced it in March 2017, and it came out in October, and it's the Farmer Stevenson Mental Health in Workplace report. I haven't actually got the title right there, but we can put a link in the show notes, because that for me was like, oh, thank you, because it was a really well researched and articulated report. And if you then dig into the actual Deloitte report behind it, where they show their methodology and looking at things like return, it's great for giving you some real data to argue that. So I kind of work it in the moral, legal, and business case, if you like. So the moral case, that this hearts and minds, we try to convince hearts and minds. I think when we're trying to convince people, let's start with minds then hearts, because the mind probably, I think most of us are decent moral people, but our heads and priorities might be shifting because we've got pressure. If you're running an organization, you've got a lot of pressures and priorities and commitments. So it's about how can we shift that into a logical, rational argument to then see, that's why it's worth doing it. And it'll help me with my priorities and challenges here.
Yeah.
And then you can win the heart over. So let's start with the business case. And the good thing about that report was it showed that on average, when they looked at a whole range of research that came out of the workplace, and the good thing about the Deloitte was that they took a lot of research but chopped a lot of it out because they said that is not the most robust, etc. report. So they focused in on what they would say is the most robust research, and out of that came this range of return that if you invest £1 wisely in this in mental health of these people, you can get a return anything from £1.50 to £9. Now that's a big range, so the average is about £4. But if you drill a bit deeper, I mean, I can kind of get into what actually contributes the most bang for your buck in that, but it kind of shows that if we do focus it can have a real financial return for those individual, for the organization, and that may be the way in to start to argue the case for it. Because if you can grab that attention, then we can start to look at the moral case and then start to look at the legal case. And in terms of legal, we've got the stress management standards in the health and safety executive. But what that report, the Farmer Stevenson report, did say was we would like to see a set of mental health standards being brought into some legal framework. Now that hasn't happened yet, and I guess we've had a lot of challenges with Brexit and now COVID-19 and those kinds of things. But I can see that if we can keep this on the agenda, that we may well get a legal framework around, I think it's six mental health standards, and there's some additional ones for larger employers as well. So if we get that, we're going to get a legal footing as well. But it's pretty much already there if you look at this management standards for health and safety. Stress and just workplace safety for keeping our people well and safe.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess, and that's really good, interesting to know that. I mean, and I guess what I'm thinking is, we've had health and safety legislation around for years, and yet we still have accidents. I mean, and I know from, I'm not, we do work with organizations with culture change around and communications around behavior change. I mean, that's what we're kind of all about. But so I guess, again, it's just this whole idea of just because it's in the law now doesn't mean it's going to happen right. It could happen, and they can do some sort of sheep dippy type stuff. But I guess from your perspective, then, if it becomes legally enforceable, what would you be? You're not. I mean, you could go in and sort of say, now it's the law. I am the law, kind of Judge Dredd stuff.
Judge Dredd.
Yeah. But I guess what we want organisations to do is actually embrace it, and so I mean, how do you see that working? If it does become legally enforceable, is it that organisations will lurch into this kind of sheep dip mentality, or is there a way of doing it and doing it right? And I guess that's something I'd like to be involved in if it does transpire.
Yeah, I think the legal thing it would be useful, but I think you're right. We need to be careful of that knee-jerk sheep dip reaction. I think really, if you look at the management standards, the history of that, that's been in a long time for the stress stuff. But the reality is, even now, organizations don't necessarily understand their responsibilities regarding conducting a stress risk assessment and stuff. And we're working, and I'm working with organizations where they're bringing that in now in a more formal basis. And so just because it becomes legal doesn't mean it's going to happen straight away. There may be an initial flurry with publicity, but then it'll kind of settle in. So we do need to focus more on that business case and then the moral, I would suggest. And with that, that's where it's not about ramming it down as a legal process or a ticky box. Because as you say, that's not the hearts and minds aspect of it, and it doesn't really get to the crux of solving the problem. When I'm just as a kind of a side note, when I'm working with people around the risk assessment side of things, I always like to encourage we develop any workshop or teaching material around this for managers in particular who have responsibility on it, to see that as not just a task but as a support to positive conversations around stress. Because if you look at the management standards, it's not rocket science. The areas make sense, and actually it can really provide tools and a structure to those conversations for a manager. So it's about how do we reframe the whole thing in this is positive, this is practical, and it's worth it for that business, moral, and last of all, legal compliance, So it's kind of how do we get that reframe, I think, is the main sort of challenge that we face, you know?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, it's the perennial challenge, isn't it? I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
one of the things we come across a lot, and probably come across the same, is the middle manager capability, and obviously they're usually the kind of key interface between the organisation and the majority of people who work in it, and if they're not able to kind of perceive their role as as someone who is able to deal with those softer issues, or to be able to manage people, not just organize them and point them in the right direction and roster their work, but actually be someone who can look after their development needs and
yeah,
engage them in their work. Then so that's always I think that cuts across many different agendas, not just health and well-being.
yeah,
So I mean, just bringing this round to the kind of the current situation, and I'm really keen not to make these shows all about just contemporary issues, because I
yeah,
want them to have longevity. But I mean, I guess we are living in the moment in a time, time recording in the middle of the kind of COVID-19 thing, where mental health. I mean, it's quite. I think it's been quite reassuring to see how mental health and well-being, and particularly for people who are isolated and working away from their normal teams, has been immediately been something that people have recognised as being something that needs to be dealt with. And I think it's kind of changed the conversation
yeah,
quite a lot. I think, and preceding that, there was already some good stuff going on, particularly about male mental health, which I know is something you're really passionate about, and really kind of focused on as well. So I think the conversation has started to change. I guess my question to you is, and maybe time will tell, maybe this will become obsolete as a question, but do you think organizations can carry on with this level of heightened awareness, or do you think in the rush to get back into normality, whatever that is, we are going to potentially lose some of the opportunities that we've built up to have this dialogue and this discourse around mental health and well-being? What are your
yeah.
thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the answer is I don't know, but I think I can go. It's probably too early to say nationally and and globally and what have you. There are some real promising signs and opportunities, but we also don't know some of the toll that it's taken on the kind of the hidden side of the mental health, and possibly till later. But I think that looking at it from conversations that I've had with some of the client organizations that I've had, that they're actually seeing, they're recognizing that it isn't just a blip and whatever. They recognize that the world is changing and the way we work is changing, and are seeing this as an opportunity to build on what they were perhaps wanting to do but didn't have the big push or the incentive beforehand, because business as usual was happening, whereas this is kind of throwing everybody up in the air. And some really forward-thinking people are kind of think, right, there's an opportunity to look at how we work, flexible working, supporting our staff and teams in different ways. And I think the principles will still be the same. It's the intention, isn't it, about how we kind of move forward. So my thoughts are that is to pick back up the conversations and the focus that was already there beforehand, and it's still there, is let's look at how do we convince the people that are the key decision makers to treat it more than just that ticky box. How do we then put in place this, give it a strategic focus and ownership, so we have people who are driving it. And I work with a number of organizations where there are people who are so passionate about this, and they're really driving this whole thing, but what around them, they need that support and that willingness to sort of oil the wheels and provide some additional resources, and to shift the conversation. So for me, it's about picking up on things like staff surveys and what are they telling us? How can we address the cultural issues, around being open to talk about mental health, our people, and developing our people, but also creating a climate where we challenge the attitudes around it. Like, if you mention the word stress, it's going to open the floodgates, that kind of thing. And also then signposting and recognizing organizations are not there to fix people, but they are there to sort of be there's an opportunity to catch somebody in the workplace who's struggling and signpost them to the right support. And when you look at the Deloitte report, again, it kind of provides some key good information there that highlights that signposting is really good. Having champions within the workplace, and perhaps your unlikely people, particularly around mental health. So people who you would think, God, I would never have thought it of them, or or somebody who can be, like you talk about men's mental health. The reason I'm passionate about that is my own personal experience, but also if you look at suicide figures and just generally the gender cultural issues around the stereotypical thing of a man, strong but silent, all of those things. It's very complicated, but it leads to challenges around how do we actually open up. And if they can have champions and role models who they would think, my goodness, I wouldn't have thought they would, and they can see that person doing it, that can help. But one of the key things is, you mentioned managers. I think it always is, isn't it? I mean, I don't know about you, but ever since I've been in the training business, whether in the police, leadership training or whatever, managers have always been that linchpin of how can we use them and develop them to be that place. And some of the research from the Farmer Stevenson report does indicate that if a wisely spent program, pound around particularly manager development in this area can yield some good returns. That said, I think we've got to be careful that we don't just say it's middle managers, because this is the thing that I sometimes have seen in the past, and I do see sometimes, is that, anybody who is responsible for other people right the way to the top, you're not just a leader or an executive this or a strategic that or a director, you're a manager and you're managing people. And therefore you need to have a conversation with your direct line about their well-being. You need to manage that person. You have responsibilities under health and safety to manage their stress. So let's have a positive conversation. So your manager, it's not just all on that team leader, manager, first line manager. It's their manager, recognizing that they're managing that manager. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So we have to change that culture, I think, as well.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, I was going to ask you, some general tips, and I think you've kind of covered them there pretty eloquently. So I want to kind of bring things sort of towards a close here. So in terms of in terms of one thing, what's one thing you kind of hold dear or do differently or think differently? Because this show, this show's about going against the grain. It's about doing things a little bit unconventionally. What's one and I know you do lots of things unconventionally in your training. What's maybe one thing that you would say is something that you hold dear that maybe goes against the grain a little bit about other people in your kind of space?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this actually, because I suppose I'm very. Yes, I do like to use unconventional ways of kind of getting people's barriers down and engaging them and giving them some memorable stuff. But I grounded in research and very much the data and the findings. Do you know what I mean? So I wouldn't say that's unconventional. Having said that, there is in the world of well-being the what I would call the happy, clappy, fluffy side of things, where people can fall into this. Well, if you just, if you embrace this and do this, and it's kind of almost like it's not science-based. They're offering well-intentioned advice that is that either they don't support with science, and there may or may not be some data there behind it or research, but not really getting the in the real world. I suppose I come at it from a police officer's perspective of, bad things happen to good people, and there's a theory called the just world theory that as human beings we can tend to fall into, that if something bad happens to somebody else, we kind of want to attribute to them, well, they must have done something wrong, they've made a mistake, and if I just work hard enough and I do the right things and I'm honourable, then I'll be fine. And the reality is that raises our chances, I guess, but things happen, bad things can happen. So it's about living, for me, in a real world where we recognize that any one of us, that 1 in 4 statistic about mental health, albeit where it came from might be a bit dodgy, it kind of indicates any one of us can struggle with mental health at any time. And how do we support that in the recognition that bad things can happen, things can go wrong in anybody's life, but let's look at what's researched and scientifically supported, those kinds of things to give us the best chance. And by all means, let's bring in some of the other stuff, the stuff that, whether it's placebo effect or what. If it works for you, then go for it. But let's not build our policies, our strategies, our development and training on what I would say is the soft and fluffy stuff that isn't proven. So I don't know if that's kind of the answer to the question.
No, it is. And I know working with you, where you blend good research. I know you're a prolific kind of research reader, and really know your stuff in inside out. So it's not, like you say, it's not just the sort of fluffy, happy, clappy stuff, but also I like the way you blend that with kind of really engaging and thought-provoking ways of getting that across. So, and we'll talk a little bit, right at the end about how people can maybe access some of that, because you talked about your cabbages and sprouts, and that's probably left people thinking, well, what on earth are you talking about there? And we haven't got time to go into that, but maybe you can flag up before we finish. One thing, a standard question I ask all of my interviewees, and this is maybe a bit more challenging for you, because, well, for us, because we've known each other so long. One thing I don't know about you, is there one thing that you that springs to mind that's suitable for the show that you could tell me about that I don't know about you? Because we've delivered loads of stuff together, and we've had lots of conversations, as you do before you're setting up a workshop, and we talk about all sorts of stuff. One thing I don't know about you, Dave, that will make me raise my eyebrows, perhaps.
I had to think about this, and I think I'm generally pretty clumsy, and I know from my policing days that my over-enthusiasm kind of caused me a few injuries, more injuries than actually, a baddie would have caused me in its time. I remember, and I think I've had to learn from that, because I can get really enthusiastic. I do get really enthusiastic, and it's a driving thing, but I can stumble into things. And I remember a couple of times, it happened in a couple of weeks, but one of them, I remember chasing after a couple of lads who nicked a mountain bike, and they climbed over a high gate into a field, and next to it was a low fence. And I thought, why are they doing that? So I climbed over the low fence to chase after them. And 6 inches above that low fence was a string of barbed wire, which went straight across my face. So that kind of, and it was in the dark, but in mid-fence. But then another one chasing a couple of kids across a garden, and again in the dark. I was running, and then straight next thing I'm on the floor looking up at a washing line that's vibrating away, and I'd run straight into that and almost like bust my nose on this washing line. So I don't know if you won't know those little stories, but for me, that was like my young, impetuous kind of enthusiasm, wanting to catch the baddies and all that kind of thing.
Inherent clumsiness.
And having to pick myself up and kind of tell people that I ran into a washing line wasn't particularly fun.
I'm sure there's a deep metaphor in there. If we had time, we could conjure up. I've got the time. But anyway, look, before we close, how can people find out more about you? How can they follow you? How can they find out more about your cabbages and sprouts, which will leave us a loose end? How can we find out more about you, Dave?
Well, my website is stressedguru.com, stressed as in stressed out, stressedguru.com, and it's dave@stressedguru.com if you want to email me. And the idea of the stressed guru is that ironic thing is I'm not setting myself up as a guru or an expert. I'm actually, I have my challenges in these areas, and again, I fall back on what works practically and what I've found to work through my own testing. So yeah, stressguru.com, check that out. I'm also developing some online materials, called De-Stress HQ Briefcase, where, for anybody who's supporting home workers and that kind of thing, there are some resources, courses, webinars. So give me a shout and we can have a jump on, and I'll give you a demo if anybody's interested. But it's been great to have a conversation with you, Craig, about this.
Yeah, no. Thank you very much, Dave. And as you know, this is kind of the early days of the show, and we're going to find our feet a little bit. So, but no, really good conversation, and found out some new things I didn't know about you. So I'm going to be very careful if I end up nicking a mountain bike and having you chase
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Yes. Well, thanks a lot, Dave. Take care.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
So thank you for listening to Engaging Internal Comms. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. We'd love to hear your thoughts about the show and any questions, ideas, or feedback that you'd have. Anything you'd like us to cover on future episodes too, please. So you can email us at info@thebigpicturepeople.co.uk, or you can get in touch with us via the contact form at engagingic.com. You can also sign up to our mailing list there, and we'll send you relevant news about the show and anything that we think you might be interested in when it comes to internal communications and employee engagement. If you like the show and you haven't already done so, please subscribe to it directly via your podcast service. And you can also subscribe via the links on our podcast page, which again is engagingic.com. If you like the show, we'd be really grateful if you could leave us a review, and also if you could leave some verbal feedback there as well, not just stars. That's always nice to know that we've been appreciated, and particularly how we've helped you. If you know anyone else who might like the show or might benefit from it, please tell them, please share it with them. Please share the link to our website, engagingic.com. And that would be great, because we want to grow our community. We want to get as many people involved in the show as possible. And the bigger, the better. Okay, thank you.